All the models have a great story. And in some ways, had it not been just an ordinary film, they wouldn't have lived on in time, whereas now everyone carries the weight of history.
We haven't done this at ILM in close to 15 years. And I thought, this all sounds great, but I think the odds of this happening are pretty slim. And then it did.
Working with Jon Favreau is amazing because he's a very innovative filmmaker. He likes to push the boundaries of technology as far as possible, and yet he's very grounded in the reality. One of the most exciting things that we're creating for The Mandalorian is a new spaceship. And Jon had a really distinct idea of what he wanted. He wanted an Army surplus vehicle, a vehicle that perhaps predates the X-Wings. And so the first goal was really find what is that simple shape that worked really well.
We're going back to the George Lucas, Ralph McQuarrie school and of an iconic shape, which it's hard to do because it does not look as complex in a sketch or in a model as some other design might.
One of Jon's favorite aircrafts is the A-10 Warthog, and I really like that aircraft because it's very distinct with these two giant engines on the rear end. And so we took that as the starting guideline, and the idea was that this was going to be a very early spaceship, and so we wanted to lean towards sort of World War II aesthetics.
Just looking at it for the first time, you'll probably remember how to draw it. I used a lot of inspiration from military-style aircrafts.
We really beefed up the engine size. We wanted to make sure that this thing looked very intimidating and very strong.
We looked at a lot of derelict aircraft, airport graveyards and stuff like that. They wanted it to be kind of a shiny aluminum warplane look. We had all these environments, and it was very difficult to make something so shiny look good in all these different environments.
When I started at ILM in 1989, we were in our heyday of motion control and miniatures. And so I was really excited about the idea that we could actually do a miniature shoot.
Jon and I talked a little further and said, well, maybe we should explore the idea of building something a little bit bigger, so not only are we getting the gross shape, but we could understand how the landing gear worked. And then Jon threw out the idea, well, why don't we just build a miniature big enough that we could actually shoot it for the show?
I learned from Guillermo del Toro, if you build a miniature, you get to have it in your house. Or a prop.
I told you. Yes. That's why we do the MoCo.
Kind of was. And so when we were talking, we're like, what about just having a reference Razor Crest for some of the lighting?
And it was at that point that I decided to call John Knoll and a few other people at ILM just to kind of throw the idea out there and just find out how feasible in this day and age it is and how useful we thought it was.
You're trying to strike the right balance between scale, having enough detail in the model to have it hold up close enough to camera, but to be able to make the shots dynamic enough that we could get far enough away from it at the far end of the track travel to get sufficient speed and range. It looked like around between 18 inches and 24 inches was a good sort of sweet spot.
In exploring the idea, we had Landis throwing his hand up and saying, I'll 3D print the model, and all it required was extra effort on his part to chop the Razor Crest up into smaller and smaller components. In doing that, we effectively kept the whole thing in-house.
Like many things, you always have this romantic idea of how this whole thing's gonna go when you first kick it off and everybody spreads from the huddle. The reality of it is, we had back-to-back printers running for about 2 weeks straight, and we would make mock-ups that he could test different processes on.
Jon and Goodson and I go way back. He's been model shop supervisor on a number of projects that I've souped. So he's natural to get involved in this project.
We were able to get him to come in to build the Razor Crest and plan out the shoot. I think the biggest concern with doing the miniature was because we have such a good digital Razor Crest asset as well, making sure that we can create something that works across the entire show.
Typically, 3D printed parts look like this. So this is the actual part that would be used, which is the rear door of the Mandalorian ship. But there's all the support structure that's attached to it. You can see this piece, how it's oriented. The build lines are parallel to the ground plane. And if you were to take this and use it as is and put aluminum over it, every single one of those little tiny lines will telegraph through on the aluminum because it's reflective. The next phase of this is to take 40 to 50 pieces that are about this size and put these things together into the ship.
John would come and pick up parts literally as I was ripping them off the printer, and he'd take them away. And then people would come in, John Knoll and others that were excited to see this stuff, and I'd say, hey, there were just 15 parts here, I swear, but now they're gone. Goodson's got them, and he's working on them. At a certain point, I walked into the shop, and he had all of those parts, and he was finishing them, and he had a mold that he was doing of the fuselage, and it kind of became real to me that it's actually coming together.
Once this was assembled, the mold was created with a part line right along the wing edge here that went all the way to the back. And that gave me a natural top and bottom for the pieces.
A lot of what we were trying to do is channel, the ILM spirit back from the founding days, where there was a lot of constructing of equipment for just the purpose of executing a handful of shots.
George had this idea of a used universe. I remember the idea came down from him. And he didn't want anything too slick or too well painted, or it also needed to look aged. And that was one of the guiding principles for our models.
When I first started at ILM back in 1981, it was a very different time in movies where problem solving very often came down to the model shop. Like wanting to do some sort of specific effect. We didn't have computer graphics at the time, and it was usually through camera tricks and miniatures.
Some of the aesthetics of what shots looked like back in the early days of motion control came from some of the physical limits of the rigs that were available.
And this is one of the things that's different about computer graphics versus miniature photography. Here, you are limited by having to have a mount point. So shot design often will be dictated by how you can mount the model.
So I worked out the whole design of the camera rig in 3D, and then once we had that together, it would be useful to get that rigged and get it to Hal so that as he was designing shots, he was limiting his motion to things that we knew could be executed.
John really wanted to get at exactly what it is that makes the space shots look the way they do in the original trilogy, and it's a really unique blend of things. And I could plan those things out in the CG environment, plan the camera move and the ship rotations, and then also figure out what the starfield was going to do behind it as a separate pass.
There were a number of shots that had a design where it was coming towards us and then we panned with it as it went away, and the ship always has a little bit of roll in it. And if you think about it, there is no way to do that kind of move with a simple two-axis mover. Early in my career, I used to actually build motion control equipment. I used to write motion control software, so this was a chance to kind of revisit some of that work from early in my career and revisit with some of the new things that are available now, 3D printers and CNC hobbyist machines. So it was a chance to kind of take all of that and build up a production-ready motion control system from scratch. The thought was, if we could build this motion control system to basically just do what the shots needed to do, we could make this all work. And we were targeting the end of May for when the shoot was going to be, and everything was underway. The model was being built. I was machining pieces for the motion control system. When we got word that John wanted to show a shot of the miniature done this way at Celebration,
you're excited for that audience to see that thing. And for us, our first audience was our colleagues. So when they saw it, the good news is everybody liked it. But then it shifted quickly from excitement of everyone receiving it so well to, we should show this at Celebration.
And that meant everything had to move up about 5 weeks.
You're not the only Star Wars fans. Up at ILM, there's a lot of Star Wars fans too, and people started coming out of the woodwork when they heard that we were doing this.
We figured, all right, what are the minimum deliverables to be able to execute a shot for celebration?
There wasn't enough time to back up and change anything, really. We just needed to go back in and do the paint, weathering. We didn't have a cockpit interior yet or lights up there. So it was the basic ship. We were at a point where it's like, this is what we got. We got to shoot it like right now.
So we picked a shot that we thought could be done, that the miniature could be finished to a state that was sufficient to hold up in that flyby shot.
John took the aluminum components that were going to be the vertical supports for his track. They became his track. He was able to get 15 feet of track, and we shot it in a conference room.
The drive electronics and the software, there was no way it could be done 5 weeks early. So we rented an old Cooper system from General Lift, and these were the systems that we used to use on our motion control stages. When the interface booted up, it was straight out of 1992.
Coming from visual effects from way back when we were doing miniatures all the way to the transition to digital, and now we're given an opportunity to actually work on a miniature, it was just mind-blowing.
Isn't that cool?
And what was really wonderful was that very first early proof of concept, which was originally maybe 1 or 2 shots, start to evolve. And so the scope of the project actually started to expand, even though our schedule didn't expand. And what was really wonderful was that we realized, okay, look, maybe we can actually get the camera closer. But our cockpit wasn't fully built out. So John Goodson went in there on his own and started to trick out the cockpit. We added more lights, we finished the back end. And we really started to slowly work our way almost all the way around the model to create something that was just an incredible model that we could shoot from many different angles. And that proved to be really wise because we ultimately ended up using quite a few of the shots of the miniature.
When the day of the shoot arrived, everything was up and running, and it was running sufficiently to be able to do the shots. We have a 2-foot model of the Razor Crest from Mandalorian, and motion control system. We're going to be shooting about 15, 16 elements of it for Series 1. In space, for the most part, what you have is the sunlight, and you have a couple of bounce cards to fill some light into the shadow side of the ship. And that's pretty simple to do on stage. We had 2 shots that got added to the list that were in atmosphere, so daytime exterior flying through the sky. And those are very difficult to do on a soundstage. So the approach that we took was to take the Razor Crest and surround it with a foam core tent. I guess we call it a gazebo. And we used cinema projectors to project imagery, desert and sky imagery, up onto the gazebo so that the ship was completely surrounded by imagery that was the right color and the right gradients. And that gave us an environmental reflection on the ship, much like the kind we do in computer graphics.
I think what was more interesting was just how enthusiastic everybody was here. There was a buzz about the place from the folks that knew what we were doing, but in addition to the people that were helping out.
It's been a little while since we've done a motion control shoot here. So we had a pretty steady parade of folks coming by who wanted to get a look to see the thing running. The impact of having that model was much broader than the 15 shots that it was in. It made the rest of the CG shots of the Razor Crest a lot better because we used the photography of the miniature to hold the CG model up to a really high standard. In the end, I think it's pretty hard to tell the difference.
Jon Favreau was adamant that this felt like old school Star Wars. Everybody was all hands on deck. We were just trying to create the most incredible imagery on the screen as possible.
It's fun to continue to dig into those old films and learn stuff about them you never knew before. It also speaks to one of the things I love about Industrial Light and Magic, which is the history of this place.
The collaboration was exceptional, and the team was exceptional. And that's what I enjoy working with John and Doug and everybody else. The freedom you're given to be creative, to know that we are really just all playing with Star Wars toys like we're kids again.